Hi, welcome to Get Used to It. I'm Sheila Kuehl, and as always, I will take you through this fascinating hour. I hope you'll stick with us because today we're talking about a very current topic, which is, does it make any difference at all if we elect LGBT people to office? What does it mean to have a place at the table? Do we really need to be there? I think you know how I feel about it, but I'm very fortunate my guest today has had some experience in this area. Jackie Goldberg, who was a member of the LA Unified School District Board, a member of the Los Angeles City Council, a 6-year member of the California Assembly, and she's now a faculty advisor at UCLA, preparing teachers to teach in underserved areas in Los Angeles, like Compton and South LA. Welcome, Jackie.
Well, always nice to be here.
Of course. Well, you heard the sort of premise, but let's start with a little history, because you were a first in quite a few places, and then I beat you in one. But with the school board, what year did you first run for the school board?
I served on the school board from 1983 to 1991, and I was not openly out in the sense that the press would use any referral about me. But my partner and I went to all the events together. She stood next to me when I was sworn in. We had a child who was still in the public schools.
And he was going, please, Mom, don't
He
come
was
out.
saying, you guys can leave and move. I can't leave my school.
Right.
I'm stuck here. And I'd rather you wait until I finish high school, and then you can do whatever you want. Our home had always been a home which everybody who came in knew. We made no pretenses in how we lived our life, but we didn't actually officially use the L word.
Still, you were the first open lesbian or gay person, even open with, friends,
Yes.
family,
Yes.
supporters. I
Yes.
mean, anybody who asked,
Yes.
really.
And we had a rule, which is, if asked, I would answer honestly.
And certainly your fellow board members knew.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
And so I guess my premise is, though we're not completely the only people that ever bring anything that helps
Oh,
the
no,
LGBT
we have allies, thank
community,
goodness.
we have good allies. But at the school board, were there policies in place before you were elected that protected our children or had anything to do with our community?
Well, the first thing I took on that affected our community was the arrested teacher business.
Uh-huh.
I had been visited by an attorney who I wish I could remember his name. I think he's deceased. But he had been one of the few attorneys in Los Angeles because his sons were both gay.
Ah.
And one of them was a teacher. And he took almost 100% of the teachers who were being arrested in West Hollywood and in Hollywood at bars, in bathrooms. And a lot of it, of course, was completely bogus. It was just entrapment and people egging you on, and then you make a move because they're coming on to you, and then they arrest you.
They turn out to be the people arresting them.
That's right. And so he came and he schooled me. He gave me an education in these cases, and he gave me documents. He let me see cases that had happened, and most of them ended up with teachers losing their teaching licenses, and losing their jobs and losing their careers.
So wait, but teachers are licensed by the state.
Right.
And they lost their licenses because?
Because it was moral turpitude. They
see,
were fooling around with, even though they were adults, they were fooling around in the bathroom, and they got arrested on sex charges. So I got in closed session the board to adopt a policy that said if the only witness to this was the arresting officer, that we would not send it to Sacramento, and we would not take any action against the teacher because it was he said. It was that one word against another. And I got permission to bring in this attorney who gave a really great pitch. And I don't think it was a unanimous decision, but it was pretty close. Almost everybody on the board at that time said, yeah, you're right.
But before you were elected?
Well, it came up because a case did come to closed session. And I said, let me tell you what I've been schooled in by this attorney who does most of these cases. Can I have him come in before we look at this case? And so what happened in that particular teacher's case was they were not thrown out of their job, and they were not, we did not send information to Sacramento to have their licenses removed.
I mean, everybody on the board knew you were lesbian.
Oh, yes, oh, yes.
One of the things that I experienced, and I'm going to come back to this each time as we go along, is this notion of authenticity. Kind of like, I'm not making this up. I
Right.
know what life is
Right,
like
right,
for us.
right,
I
right.
know, you know, how we're treated and how people think
Well,
of us, and I know what's
our-
been going on here.
Our male gay brothers, of course, have a much harder time to hoe because,
Right.
you know, the society will, even then, in the 80s, was more accepting of lesbians than it will ever be probably of
Well, that's why so
of
many of us
men
sort of got
giving-
in first on
yeah,
these.
men giving up their privilege. I mean, for God's sakes, that's what
Right, you
could
can
be worse.
understand why we'd want to be men.
Exactly.
Well, that was what they
Well,
were
I know,
talking about in the
exactly,
70s,
exactly,
right?
exactly. So that was the first thing.
Wow.
And then came the AIDS crisis. And in New York and in Chicago and in Philadelphia and other big city schools, teachers who had any indication that they might have AIDS were simply being let go, which meant they lost their health care as well as their employment. Schools were panicking. I understand the panic because nobody knew yet what was
Right.
causing it or where it was coming from, for sure how it could be transmitted, though they were pretty sure it wasn't by casual contact or by breathing or sitting next to someone.
Well, there was a lot of hysteria about
But there
it,
was
though.
a lot of hysteria because people were dying in fairly significant numbers. Not enough hysteria, of course, to put any federal money into researching it because they were gay
Well, you
people who were dying.
Right. Well,
and
you never even heard the president say the
Yes,
word.
right.
You know?
But I went to our board and I said, you know, we need a policy for this that says that these are people who are ill, that medical science is telling us that while they may not entirely understand it yet, they know how it's not transmitted. So that if you're sitting in a classroom next to a teacher or next to a student that may have the virus, you're not going to get it that way. It's sexually transmitted. And so I said, you know, I think that one of the things we needed to do was to have a policy, an AIDS policy. And we had hearings, and oh my God, what a zoo and a circus. I'm sure somebody still got tapes of those meetings, but it was a zoo. But again, we had a pretty decent board of education, including the Republicans on it, which I give a lot of credit to Roberta Weintraub, who at the time was the wife of a doctor and believed in medicine as an understanding
And
of
evidence.
things as opposed to hysteria. And we put into place a policy that said that students and teachers and classified employees and administrators have the same requirement with AIDS as they have with any other illness. That is, that if it's going to impair their ability to learn or to teach or to be a cafeteria worker or whatever job they had, they needed to come forward and say so, but we weren't going to inquire. Well, oh my God, you should have seen my mail. Holy cow.
I think that's going to be a refrain all through
Yes,
the show.
I think so.
Oh my
but-
God, you should have seen my
Oh, it
mail.
was really terrible. It was-
Yeah.
And then if that weren't enough, I said that we had an absolute obligation to inform families of children and young adults that were attending our schools about what we did know about AIDS and how it was transmitted. Age appropriate, of course. For little children, we were going to send home a bilingual, multilingual actually, we had it done in several languages, set of materials that told parents that sitting next to a child was not dangerous, that we didn't know if there were children who had AIDS. We didn't think so because most of them are pretty sick and they aren't in school, but we weren't going to do anything to try to find out because once the child is sick, they would be gone, and they weren't going to transmit it by sitting next to each other or, frankly, even holding hands on the yard as young children often do. We did a middle school kind of one. And then we got to the high school one, where I said I thought this should be the most candid and the most frank. And they kept bringing me versions of it, and every version I said, no, we're not sending that out. No, we're not sending that out. And finally they said, well, what do you want us to do? And I said, you have to talk about anal sex. They said, you have got to be kidding.
Right.
On a brochure from LA Unified, I said, well, let's put it this way. Let's say that you're a parent, and we don't tell you that that's the way you can get it. And so you don't discuss that with your children. And your child gets AIDS. Now, who's really responsible? we have an obligation to do that. Well, I finally got them to send out a pamphlet to every kid in every high school in all our adult centers that really told people how you got AIDS and how you didn't get AIDS. We didn't have HIV notion yet. We didn't have a virus.
Right, and now, of course, that's the state law, that every child must be educated about, about this.
Right. And then, of course, let's see what else came up during that time. We did, gee, I lost it. I had three things, and I only can think of two now. The two around AIDS.
And you already talked about the teachers.
Yeah, and there was a third one. Oh, well.
Well, it'll come to you. But, and let me ask you this before we talk then
about... I know what it was. It was Project 10.
Oh, well.
Which started with Virginia Uribe at Fairfax High School here in West Hollywood. And the Republicans had taken over the legislature at this time, and they passed a resolution, not really a law, but they passed a resolution saying that LA Unified would not get another cent of ADA this year, this school year, until they got rid of Project 10 and Virginia Uribe.
You should probably say what Project 10 was.
Project
I'm
10
sure a lot of
still
people
is,
know, but
Project 10 still is a first probably of its kind in the country, where a counselor, a teacher, a nurse, some adult in the school volunteers to have a club where kids who think they might be gay, know for sure they are gay, can come and talk about problems they're having, whether that's harassment or bullying, whether it's their parents, whether it's being beaten up, whether it's that they're suicidal and want to kill themselves, or whatever the things were. And it turned out that this science teacher, Virginia Uribe, Dr. Uribe, had a lot of experience with psychology and psychological training, started this one class at lunchtime at Fairfax High School, but she had books. And in one of the books was coming out stories. And in one of the coming out stories, one of the high school seniors had an affair with a teacher. And the Republicans glommed on that as if we were encouraging teachers to have affairs, homosexual affairs, lesbian affairs with students, and they insisted that Project 10 be stopped by the Board of Education. And I will say to you, probably one of the proudest moments of my life was a resolution that I brought to the board that was signed by all 7 board members and the superintendent, that said that we wholeheartedly stand behind the work of Dr. Uribe and Project 10 at Fairfax High School.
Well, LA Unified has been interesting. LA Unified has been very good generally all through the years about it. And I know you would not say, had you not been elected, they would not have been as good. But just to sort of keep on the theme, and it's simply a theory, I don't know if you and I know what it would be like had we never been somewhere, but it just seems to me that the notion of having attention paid to the real issues of our community has generally happened 98% of the time because one of us was at the table.
Well, I think some of the things I did might have been done by somebody else, but I don't think anybody would have taken on either the AIDS at that moment or the arrested teacher. They might have supported Dr. Uribe. They really might have, because she was a popular teacher there. She wasn't doing anything wrong. It was at lunch. It was a volunteer group of kids who came in because they were questioning or they already knew they were gay, you know. But I don't think that they would have taken the same positions on immediately, which is what needed to happen on the AIDS thing, was to, because right after LA did it, all kinds of districts stopped being so hysterical.
Right.
So they figure if the second largest school district in the country feels like it's safe, they're not going to get sued, they're not going to, you know, that's what big institutions worry about.
Well, it makes a big difference because it's like a template for other districts, although the smaller districts are sometimes, the boards are less professional. That's not quite the right word, but you know, less experienced, and
but
so
they're
they
there
don't
forever.
know how to, you know, make these rules.
That's right. That's right.
Or they don't want to.
Or they don't want to. So I do think it makes a difference. It made a huge difference because most of my colleagues were willing to support what I was doing. I don't know that any of them were willing to be the target of that amount of anger and mail.
Well, it's very difficult. I mean, and they probably were a target after they voted for something or after even they supported something. But I'm sure you drew the highest percentage of the ire about it.
Yes, yes.
And was there any support shown? I mean...
Oh, yes. Actually, the county health department came and testified about this. I mean, I got a lot of help from the medical community. They really wanted the panic to stop because they wanted to be able to figure out who was getting it and what they could do about it, as opposed to having to treat literally thousands of people who were coming in trying to find out if they had AIDS, who had really very unlikely they would have had any contact with anyone who had it. But there was hysteria in the country. And so they were, in fact, they were pushing us to put out some information about how you get it and don't get it, or let them do it and send it out. Well, my board members were not convinced they wanted the medical community just to write it. They wanted it age appropriate for school-age children. So we did have a health services group within the bureaucracy in LA Unified, and they wrote them, and only really had trouble with one little problem. That was spelling out that anal sex is a major way that people get it.
I can only imagine that it was opening the pamphlet.
But you know, the interesting thing was I got almost no negative feedback from parents. I mean, not one. My phone's listed in the phone book at the time. It still is. My phone was listed on all of the material that went out by the board. I had really, the parents were grateful. They were happy to get some information.
Well, that's been an interesting thing, I think, for all of us when we first wade into the water of this kind of thing, because you don't really know. I mean, when you're elected, you know a bunch of people, but you don't know everybody.
Right.
And there's like a whole bunch of people out there, even those that you represent, that you haven't really met in person.
Oh, really? That's
and
for
you don't really know. And one of the nice things often that happens is when people are supportive and they're just good people and they want good things to happen, and they understand that it's difficult or that it's hard to talk about. Schools, though, have been really flashpoints for so much of this.
It's true.
Because the right wing keeps saying, you know, oh, we have to protect the children so that, you know, protect them so that they'll all get sick and die. I mean, I don't know what kind of protection they were talking about.
Right.
But I found that schools were the most difficult arena to do stuff around education about our community. And then you went to the city council.
Yeah.
So how many years were you on the board?
83 to 91. And then from 91 to 93, I worked half-time at Grant High School. I taught 4 periods a day, which is really more than half-time, but that's all they paid you was half-time for 4 periods a day. And the other half of the day, I worked for Gloria Molina, Supervisor Molina, as her Children's Services Deputy, which was fascinating because it was another look at what's happening to children in our county in terms of foster care issues, in terms of deadbeat dads, and occasionally deadbeat moms, but mostly deadbeat dads, in terms of what effect drugs were having on low-income communities, where there was hunger, where people were not paying any attention to hunger. And so for 2 years I did that, which I found really, really interesting.
But then you decided to run. So
well, actually, that was the one I wasn't actually interested in running for. That was the one I kind of got talked into running for.
Because somebody was, well, you didn't have, they weren't termed out.
No. It was, Wu was running for mayor, so it was an open seat. It was an open seat. So I first of all, I'd looked at the map and I thought I wasn't in the 13th district. I thought I was in the 1st. Which was sort of downtown and east, and I thought Echo Park was in the 1st. So at first I said, I'm not running because I'm not in the district and I ain't about to move.
Right.
But basically it was women's organizations and some gay and lesbian organizations came to me and said, well, there are some gay candidates, it's true, but the women's organization said there's only one woman on the city council now. We'd like there to be more. And some of the gay organizations said, we'd rather you be the first openly gay elected officials. And then I said, well, my son was a senior in high school. I said, I'm not going to be open until the November election, because the June primary, he's still
before graduation.
right before he graduates. Okay. So it turned out that one of the gay candidates outed me. Because we had, Sharon and I and Brian had the policy, if anybody asked, I wasn't going to deny it. So somebody interviewed one of the two men that were running that were gay, and he said, well, how do you feel having two gay candidates in this race? And he said, 3. And so then they called me and said, are you the third? And I said, yes. And it was a funny story, because my son was playing varsity basketball at Marshall High School. And the paper came out on Thursday right before a very big game on Friday. And I said to Brian, are you going to get harassed? And he said, oh, Mom, athletes don't read newspapers. They still won't know you're gay. So, he was fine with it all along, except for saying I'm captive and I can't leave, and I'd rather not have to fight that battle until I can leave when I want to.
Right.
But so but I remember him saying that to me. I'm thinking, oh, okay, hon, that's fine. So I did get elected, and actually the first and second place were me and Tom LaBonge, who is now on the city council. It wasn't either of the two other gay candidates. One finished like 4th and one finished 5th. They weren't even first, second, they weren't even third. So it turned out that people who wanted me to run were right, that I had the better chance of winning. There was already on the city council a gay member, but he was never going to come out until he ran for mayor, and that was Joel Wax. He had put on the calendar a domestic partnership registry in the city for city employees, which would get you bereavement leave for your relatives or your partner's relatives.
One of those very early limited kind of
that was it.
DPs.
And he did it without telling anyone formally, publicly, that he was gay, although I always told him that it was the best kept non-secret in
Well,
Los
Joel
Angeles.
and I were friends from the first minute of our freshman year at UCLA.
Right.
And I knew his mother, and he, like many, many in our community, it was kind of like, well, everybody else can know, but it'll kill my mother.
Yeah.
And of course, your parents know.
Of course.
And yet, you think, oh, well, I don't want them to have to face it. And that's really what was
with
going
my
on
mother-in-law,
with Joel all along.
Yeah, with my mother-in-law, we never actually used the words, but we stayed in the same bed in the same bedroom in her house when we visited Chicago, so it wasn't like she could miss it.
Well, they do know. I mean, we find out.
She knew. But Sharon also felt that there was no reason to make her have to confront her Irish Catholic upbringing when she accepted me, and and our son were welcome in her home, and that's all we really, we needed was acceptance. We got that, so I understand the nuances. But anyway, so I had told Stonewall and I had told Harvey Milk, both of which still existed, clubs, that I was going to, in my first term, try to do something about equal benefits, complete equal benefits.
So when you say that Joel put it on the calendar, what does that mean?
I mean, he started the ball rolling. There was a registry. Nobody registered in it because if all you could...
So it actually existed at the time.
But
only for bereavement.
Only for bereavement. That was it.
Hospital visits?
No. Because we didn't have any control over that.
Right. Oh, right, of course.
It was the city's bereavement policy. It was our employees, and
Got
it was city bereavement policy. Okay, so there was we had no control over visitations in hospitals. That was hospital policy. And nobody signed up for it. I went and looked at the registry. I think there were like 12 people on it, and he had done it years before I was elected. Because if you don't get anything out of it, to take a risk of being out to people who may not like you if you're out, seemed like too big a risk. I suspect I didn't actually get an interview. So I had been in office for about less than a year. And
now you were really out. I mean,
oh,
Brian
no, I ran out.
No,
I ran out because I'd been outed. I ran in the June primary out.
Right.
I mean, I ran out.
Right.
I was out in June. I was out in November. I mean, I was going to wait till November, but I didn't have a choice, so there we go. at a staff meeting, one of my staff members, who was not gay, said, well, you know, this is a time to be looking at the things that you said you were going to do and to various groups that you were interviewed by. And so we began going through them in the staff meeting, and we came to the benefits, equal benefits for city workers. And I said, well, you know, I should go test the water. Who knows? It was a pretty liberal city council. Why don't I go find out, you know, who would do it? So I started, and I just went through each council office, and I asked everybody, you know, would they vote for this? And immediately, without argument or convincing on my part, really, I got 10 yeses, which is like, you know, 2/3 of the council. Mm-hmm. I got only one no or maybe two no's, but I got one no for sure, and one I thought said he wasn't sure what he was going to do. Mm-hmm. So that's 12, I was 13, and two others kind of were hedging their bets a little bit too, but they didn't say no. Mm-hmm. I only got one no. And I remember saying, when I was in one of the offices, one of the members who'd been on the city council a really long time looked me right in the eye and said, you know, that's long overdue. And I thought, well, you've been here forever. Why didn't you bring it? But I didn't say it. I wanted his vote, so of course I said, yeah, I think it's long overdue too. And I got kind of that reaction from several longtime members who said,
well, that sort of goes along with this question.
Yes, exactly.
But sometimes I wonder, well, they can't have be deferring to the gay person because there was no gay person.
That's right.
And they could have done it.
They could have done it. Several of them who immediately said yes. And it turned out one of them had a sister who was, I mean, I didn't know any of that at the time, but, and a couple of them who kept saying, oh, I'm glad you're doing it. We should have, you know, done this long ago. And I remember actually sitting there thinking, I'm happy that they're going to vote for this. Right. I'm happy we're going to get this done in my first year, when I thought it would be like year 3 or 4 of my first term, you know. Mm-hmm. But why didn't they do it, you know? And I suspect that it wasn't high enough on their agenda. They weren't opposed to it. They had other things they were going to do first. Maybe if there had been a whole bunch of LGBT groups that kept coming to them and saying, do this, do this, do this, they might have. But none of them could, all of them could have, none of them would have, I think, for significant time yet. And so I put it up, and it got like 13 votes or 12 votes or something, and bango, bango, it was done. Now, it didn't happen as immediately as that, because we had to do because it involved pensions as well. Right. So we had to wait for all of this other stuff. But I remember making the call to the guy who was in charge of the benefits section at the personnel department. And I said to him, you know, I don't know if anybody's asked you to ever look into this yet, but maybe they have, so why should we start from scratch? If I wanted to do equal benefits, health care and dental care and pensions and leaves of absences for spousal or whatever, if I want to do that, do we have any kind of cost analysis? He says, I'll be in your office in 5 minutes. This guy was gay, had been collecting this information for years, and so we got it done very quickly, because all we had to wait was the actuarial, which was the only piece we had to do for the pensions. Everything else, he had already had all the information. I thought, this is wonderful. Who knew? Who knew?
So you have domestic partners now for the city employees only. Right. And a sense that you kind of had to be there to get this ball rolling.
Yes. Again,
even
and no trouble. They were
us.
all supportive. I mean, really, I think we got one no vote, and everybody else who didn't vote yes abstained. I mean, it was near unanimity. So it was, and people were talking about how this was an important thing to do. And
well, it is sort of the diversity thing.
Yes.
I mean, you know, when you serve on a thing, it doesn't come to mind right away. Right. Because you don't really understand the day-to-day lives of people who are not you. Exactly. Don't understand the day-to-day lives of immigrants. You don't understand the day-to-day lives of African Americans. You don't, I mean, if you're me. And so, where's the authenticity? Yeah. But as soon as someone says to me, this is what's happening in this community, and this is how we need to address it, I would say, I'm there. Right. But again, this is why I think they talk about a place at the table. Oh, it's not just, oh, I have a nice little card with my name on it.
My life, in my opinion, absolutely is the perfect example of that. because I think that all of the things that I did probably would have been done eventually. But it would have taken a lot longer in some cases. I mean, I have no idea when they would have ever gotten around to doing it in the city. I mean, really, some of these guys, you know, I came in the first class that was going to be term limited,
Right.
so except for my class, everybody had been there a while, and
Right.
some a long while, and they must have voted for Joel's motion to create the registry.
But they wouldn't say, why don't we go further?
No, they
Or
didn't.
they didn't,
They didn't.
anyway.
They could have, but they didn't.
And were there other issues in the council that were adopted while you were there?
Well, there was the beginnings of the notion of some state benefits, okay? But you needed to be in a registry, and I don't believe there was a state registry yet, or maybe there was, I don't think so. So I went over to the county, and because of the people I had gotten to know while I was working for Molina, got them to start a county registry, okay? Which they did, which Zev voted on it, and
Because you went over there.
and Edelman voted on it, and I think Molina, of course, carried it. So the three of them started the registry. That meant now that anybody working for anybody in LA County, okay, could sign up, and as a result of signing up, it would entitle them to hospital visitations. It would entitle them to certain things, not yet benefits like your spouse's or your partner's medical benefits. That came a little later. And I was a perfect example because my back went out. I was in Cedars and down the street here, and I said to the doctor or the nurse that just after I was admitted. Now, of course, you know Sharon's my partner, and if anything you need to, if I'm not able to make decisions, she can make decisions. He said, do you have documentation of that? I said, why would I need documentation of that? I mean, this, you know, so it actually happened to me.
Sure.
And they said, well, no, you have to have a
Power of attorney.
power of attorney. So I said, fine, you know, let's write out something and we'll sign it. It says, no, actually,
There's a form.
there's a form. Plus, here's the best part, nobody in the hospital can witness it, be the witnesses. Because if they work for the hospital, there might be a conflict of interest.
So you have to grab somebody in
So
the
we
waiting
had
room.
to find people
I'm sure.
who were not
Knocking down the wall.
employees to come and witness this power of attorney.
Oh, I remember because I
Yeah.
did the same thing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's you know, it's very important.
And someone said to me, well, gee, you were a smart person, an educated person. Why didn't you know you had to have that? I said, well, you don't think of things
we
when
didn't
you
know. I
didn't
mean,
need it.
all we had in our community was, you know, somebody would have a marriage license, one
Yeah.
piece of paper, and we would have, you know, a
I-
major.
oh,
we used to do these
I s-
trainings.
I still
Here's
have-
what you need. You
I
know, to
still have a
protect yourself.
suitcase because,
Yeah.
of course, we had a child.
Right.
And we tried to have Sharon be a legal parent of Brian when he was a little boy. And they said, of course she can be his legal parent. All you have to do is
Just give
renounce
up.
your parenthood.
Exactly. One mother
I said,
at a
no,
time.
hold it, hold it, hold it. Why would I have to give well, that's the way it works unless you're married. You know, so there's a lot of stuff that people may have forgotten
Well, and
about.
it's kind of
yeah.
evolved,
Yeah.
you know, over time, and I think it's evolved not 100% because we carried this stuff.
No,
But
no,
when
I don't
you
ever
know-
want to ever downgrade.
No, because allies, well, for instance,
Who voted for
when
the things
I
I put
was
on?
elected in '94, there had already been a bill passed and put on the governor's desk and vetoed by Governor Wilson to protect us in the employment code. Somewhat limited fashion, but still, you know, to add us there. And our allies in the Senate and the Assembly at that time, in the early '90s, had, you know, had gotten this through.
Yeah.
And some of them, a couple in the closet, but, you know,
Yeah.
they were not out.
Yeah.
And people were very good about it. But
Yeah.
nothing had actually made it
Yeah.
into law.
Yeah.
And when I got up there, as I was alone for a while,
I
as the only
remember.
out person until Carol
Table for
Migden.
one.
Right. The Gay and Lesbian Caucus has its first lunch. Kuehl, Party of One. Yeah, it was a great cartoon. Until Carol Migden was elected. And I decided that I wanted to work, as you know, on the Dignity for All Students Act to protect students, because we were getting so many stories at that time that it was our kids who were the most vulnerable, not the only ones, because you know, we were getting beat up out in the community too. But it was horrible for them in a almost, you know, a prison lockdown environment, which is a school. They couldn't get out. And, but no one had thought to address this issue. It was very controversial. There had been protections enacted in some of the school districts a little, but nothing statewide. And it was completely smacked down in the first year that I brought it. Didn't even make it out of, you know, the education committee. And then when I brought it back 2 years later, Migden was there. She had taken Willie Brown's seat when he left and ran for mayor. And it was just interesting because actually there was a funny dynamic on the floor because I was the speaker pro tem. My seat was way in the back because I was hardly ever in it. Migden's seat was way in the front. And so there would be this kind of feeling of, I don't know, energy that, you know, that connected us. And Migden used to say, you know, if we wanted a complete hush on the floor, all we had to do was hug because everybody would, you know, they'd break their, just about break their necks looking. But it was, I mean, people were very supportive, who were supportive, but as you say, no one had thought to do it.
Yeah.
No one had wanted
That's
to
the
do
key.
it.
That's the key.
And then when Migden was the one who did the domestic partner registry for the state, it was really the same thing. You know, at that time it was just the two of us who were out before you and Kuehl got there. And it was, I never thought for a minute, oh, I have to do gay bill.
Yeah, no, I didn't either.
You know,
I didn't either.
Because it was one of 50 bills that I did in the first 2 years,
Right.
although one of the ones that I'm most proud of. But it was apparent to me that there were places that needed us to be added in. We were not seen as a beleaguered minority. And yet we were in just very much the same way as others. So it was interesting to be at that table. And your experience when you got there, I don't actually know. I know you said to me, you never cried so much in any job in your life.
It's incredible.
I hope that you laughed too.
I thought, oh my God, I'm this marshmallow. Everybody thinks I'm such a toughie. And
well, it's so emotional.
Yeah, it
I've
is.
never been in such an emotional job in my life. And not just because it's personal. Because every day you're kind of like living out your values.
Yeah, really.
You throw up your mic, make a speech on the floor about justice. I mean, it's a fabulous job in a way. And yet, you know, pierce your, oh, sorry about that. Pierce your heart. I just hit the mic. I really apologize. Pierce your heart every minute, you know. But you were the one who carried the big
bill.
The big domestic partner bill. Tell a little about that.
Well, you know, I had sort of thought that Carol Migden and others were doing most of the heavy lifting, and I had said to her when I first got there how grateful I was that she was doing that, but that I had wanted to do something, and the next piece seemed to be a biggie. You know, did we want to do it together or whatever? And really, unlike most legislators, she said, no, you go ahead. This is fine. I've done a lot of this stuff. You can go ahead and do it. So, you know, I thought we would maybe do it jointly or something like that. You know, I sat down with my staff and said, you know, here's what we need. We need this many in the Assembly and this many in the Senate, and let's start counting noses and finding out who's where and who's what.
Now say for a minute, because I'm sure not everyone is familiar with what 205.
Oh, 205 was the domestic partner bill, which basically boils down to, except for on income tax, which came later, every place in any code of state government that talks about spouse now included domestic partners who had signed up in the state's domestic partner registry.
Child custody, all of those
adoption, workplace, wherever you had to sign a spouse's name for anything.
Pick up the kids at school.
Pick up the kids at school.
Decisions, everything.
Sign their report cards, whatever. And I will say, and I will say this quite repeatedly over and over again, Gray Davis's office was a big help. And lots of times when the man himself may have gotten a little concerned at how far this was going, his staff was able to help him understand where we were taking as much precaution as possible. He asked only one thing when we started down this path. He wanted to be able to say it was cost neutral to the government. And that's why we left out the income tax that you could file jointly, which was done subsequently, I think, by Migden. Yeah.
Right.
But he asked me to leave that out, and we debated it, but we figured that it probably wouldn't help too many people all at once anyway.
Right.
Because it's you have to go through a lot of rigmarole to decide whether to file jointly or not.
Well, and sometimes it's an advantage to marry people, and sometimes it isn't, depending on,
your
things keep
income,
changing.
the income of
Right.
of each of you. But also, we also found out that the major way that people's IRS forms are audited is as if they disagree with what happened at the state level. Because they send tapes of the state ones to the feds, and the feds send tapes to the states, and they match them because of your Social Security number is on this, or an employer ID, or whatever it is. And so we thought, well, okay, so we don't have a hassle of people filing married jointly in California and single in the Fed, and the feds start knocking out all these gay and lesbian couples
because they didn't match.
And now for audit, I thought that would be a really positive thing.
We wouldn't have done anything really nice for them.
Right.
But it was a big thing, that
was
bill.
a very big thing.
I mean, it was
a very
it's
big
really
thing.
all of the benefits and all the responsibilities
Absolutely. That was the part
of marriage.
And actually, we did an odd thing. We delayed the implementation for a full year. Because a lot of people who had signed up on the registry to get each other's health care benefits, but not the responsibility for each other's kids.
It was much more limited. Well, we had actually a notice that had to go out to current partners saying, you better watch out.
Yeah, get off the registry if this is not what you're looking for.
Right.
Get off the registry if this is not what you intended.
Well, and it's funny, too, because I think all of these steps, as people understood that all the benefits that we were talking about, it made, to some extent, it made marriage a little less scary, unless you were purely doing it from a religious point of view, in which case we weren't having a religious marriage in the state anyway. And although we still don't have marriage in California because of Prop 8.
No, I'm married.
Yes, 18,000 couples are married in California, and probably more that have moved here. But it was a very, very big step, and there were a number of big steps. Chris Kuehl carried bills, and then when Laird and Leno were elected in the next round, and we had our first guys up there, they were carrying, a number of bills. I think, with the exception of Antonio's bill that actually did amend the employment code and finally got it signed, again by Gray. I mean, Gray signed so many good bills for us. I think it's been primarily our little caucus.
Yeah, I think so too.
And not so little, I mean, 6 people, but, and then 7 at its high point. So let me ask you, as we're not quite winding down yet, but term limits in the city council, attrition in the school board, do they have term limits?
They do now.
And probably in a lot of city councils around the state, boards of supervisors, we have term limits now in LA County, and certainly in the legislature, means, to me, means a bench. You have to develop a bench. Because people will term out and you will not have LGBT people in elected office.
You're absolutely right.
And I've been talking about how important that is.
Well, I tried when I left the assembly to get a lesbian woman. I was looking for either a gay man or a lesbian woman, but to get a lesbian woman who lived in the community, who was Latina, who would represent both the Latina population and women and lesbians and gay community elected. But unfortunately, the politics of the time were that somebody else was being groomed by the powers that be in my own party, and they put a fortune in electing a straight Latino male instead of who never lived in the district, who still doesn't live in the district. Instead of a person who lived in the district, was from the district, grew up in the district, and who would have represented more than one community.
Well, it's interesting too, because sometimes people in our own community don't support the gay or lesbian candidate.
I know.
It's like, that's not the only thing you should go on. There's no question.
No, but all things being equal, right?
Come on, you know, I mean, but I do think that part of it comes from the fact that people do not quite get how important it is to have a place at the table.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how else to put it.
I think because there are a number of people who are good on our issues who are not from our community, I think people do actually believe that allies will do what you will do if you were there. And I don't believe that. My own experience has definitely not been that. Anywhere I've been, actually. Anywhere I've been.
Right. There's as I said, it's an authenticity issue. And of course, if we compare it to something else, in the old days, there were only men in the legislature.
Yeah, right.
And they would assure, even in the days of fighting for women's suffrage, they would assure the women, the good guys, don't worry, we'll take care of you. We've got your best interest at heart. You don't need to be in the rough and tumble of all of this, girlies. We'll take care of you.
It's pretty crude, after all.
And yet, just being there, even if you don't go up as the first woman, if you're Rose Vuitch in the state Senate in California, for instance, had a little bell on her desk, and whenever the person chairing the floor would say, "Gentlemen of the Senate," she would very quietly ring this little bell to remind them that they weren't all gentlemen in the Senate. There was a lady, and there was no bathroom for her.
I know.
And, you know, they
I visited her bathroom.
Right,
the Rose
and now it's
bathroom.
the Rose Room. But still, I think it was always bogus to say to us, "Don't worry, girls. We're your allies, and we can do it." And I don't see any difference there.
I don't either. I don't either. It's the same thing with African Americans or Native Americans or Latinos. I mean, you know, you need to have people who are from that community, who've lived and walked that walk in order to be able to represent those interests, which doesn't mean that even though I was a Anglo representing a Latino community, I felt often that, and it is part of why I didn't run for the Senate, I felt that it should be a Latino representative because I would have won the seat. You know, but I just felt that it was important that it be a Latino.
Well, I think, and it's more than diversity, though. I know that some of the
it
people
isn't
watching
only
the
that,
show
because when I
are
ran
saying,
for the
you know, is this political correctness?
No, because when I ran for the assembly in that same Latino district, the people running for the assembly, some of whom were Latino, were not ready for prime time, in my opinion. Now, that's my opinion, but I didn't have any trouble running in that race because the people who were running in that race were not particularly, they hadn't done the things that I had already done. I was going to be able to do in 6 years more than they were going to be able to do in 6 years. Not because I'm smarter, but I had already had other elected experience, and I'd had the experiences that would make it easier for me to transition to Sacramento. I didn't feel that way about the Senate race. I did not feel that way about the Senate race.
Well, I was sorry that you didn't personally, because you were a great legislator. But
I did feel like there were other people who could do it.
Well, but that's because we understand.
Yes.
I mean, you understand what it means to be there.
Yes.
I mean, I remember the stories that were told. We would have a sort of a nothing bill that we were all fighting over about whether you could use leaf blowers or not.
Yes.
And all the people would show up going, "Oh, they're waking me up at 7 in the morning and they're horrible." And then, you know, Tony Cardenas and others would stand up on the floor and say, "My grandfather and my father, you know, were and are gardeners, and do you know what it takes to rake and rake and rake and rake, and what that means, you know, to the body?" And I'm thinking, you know, I don't know if I even agree with him, because of course I got woken up at 7 in the morning, but it was different. It was something, something being said where people say, "This is a real life here."
Right.
We
Right.
need to hear
Right.
this real life.
Right.
And it's the same with us. Nobody knows what our lives are
I
like,
know,
really.
I know. No, they don't. They don't. You have,
You know, what it feels like not to be able to marry.
well, it's the notion of walking a mile in someone else's moccasins. A very old saying, but it's a very good saying, and it's why people have to be at the table. They just have to be, you know, and obviously if I had a LGBT person who was reactionary running and a straight white male who had progressive politics, I'm with the straight right male. So I'm not saying you don't take into consideration all things, but if you don't take in consideration also the need that people have to be represented, have their voices actually heard, who can stand up in a legislature and talk about their own experience and their own family's experiences, then I think you've missed something really important about diversity in America.
Also, the difficulty of climbing that ladder
Yeah.
makes you kind of a scrappy person in the legislature. Because virtually everybody there from our community are progressives or very close to progressives.
Yeah.
And it is interesting because I'm doing some consulting with Planned Parenthood now, and they want to run a bill next year. And they were looking, I was, you know, sitting listening to their conversation. They were looking at who they might want for authors, and every single one they named was a gay or lesbian person. And it was interesting to me because this wasn't a gay bill, and it wasn't because they were gay or lesbian.
No.
But the fact of, you know, needing to do the fight. I watch Holly Mitchell, for instance, who's an African-American member of the Assembly now, if you don't know her. And her scrappiness and her, you know, commitment. It's something very important in the life experience of people who've had to fight for stuff.
Yeah, well, if you're not automatically a part of the mainstream, you do get a kind of a I'm prepared to take on real adversity because whether I choose to or not, it's coming to me anyway, so it might as well be on my terms. At least that's how I look at it.
Well, and also you're not so go along and get along either. I mean, we're not saying everybody in our community who's ever been elected, but I do think when I was there, the people that I knew from our little caucus, we wouldn't always just automatically go, you know, you say jump, I say how high.
Right.
We were asking questions.
Right.
I mean, I'll never forget you running that education committee. Questions are us, you know, and it was very, very important. Well, the Victory Fund is a national organization that helps support gay and lesbian people running for
and they helped me.
State office, and it is a big help, I think.
They helped me. They helped me, the amount of money I got wasn't spectacular, but it was money I didn't have to go out and get.
Right.
And it was always when I would talk to my treasurer, she'd say, oh, and you got a little something from the Victory Fund this week. And it was like a little boost, you know, it's a little boost. I know in some races they raised spectacular amounts of money, but mine wasn't one of those. Although they raised money for me, don't misunderstand me, and I was very grateful. But it was also the boost and knowing that there was sort of somebody who was out there kind of helping you that you didn't have to actually expend your own personal energy to go get. It makes a big difference.
Well, you know, I was thinking too when you were talking about the school board, how the right wing has really made it a guiding strategy to try to take over at that level. I shouldn't say take over, but certainly enter those races in order to be elected, understanding how important it is. I think that thinking to control education is to control the next generation. That's the way they're thinking. And frankly, it's not so far off.
Oh, it's definitely not so far off. And one of the things that's interesting is that they very often run stealth campaigns. That is to say, the people running don't say what they believe in when they run. You find out after you got them, which I think is the crappiest thing that anybody in a democracy can do, but nonetheless, it's not illegal.
On the other hand, with us, you pretty much know what you're getting.
You know
my story of the guy who came over to me when I was first running and said, he pounded on the table and he said, Sheila, I hate all politicians. I hate them. Can't stand them. They all lie. They dissemble. They won't tell you the truth. They don't give you a straight answer. I hate them all except for you. And I said, well, thank you very much. But why me? And he said, well, you already told us the worst thing about yourself. Meaning I had come out Why would you lie about anything else?
That's a wonderful
Well,
story.
but you know, it taught me something.
Yeah.
Because you think it's all terrible adversity and, oh,
Yeah.
I'm struggling and, oh, what if they hate me? And then you forget
Yeah.
that it's seen as courage and honesty
Yeah.
if you're out.
Yeah.
Because it's not that easy to be out, certainly
Right.
not to run
Right.
out.
Right. That's for sure.
And I think there is an aspect to that of
Yeah.
being courageous and being honest simply by saying, this is who I am. And
Right.
now, can we talk about what I'd like to do?
Yeah.
So if you were advising, here in the last 5 minutes of the show, anybody thinking of running, and they're members of our community, a transgender person not yet elected to state office here in California, although a member of parliament in New
Yeah.
Zealand.
Yeah. I saw.
Yeah, pretty cool.
Yeah.
What would you advise people thinking of running for something?
Well, I always say first find a community that you plan to set down some roots in and stay in, because even though people do, if they have enough money, elect people who move into your community, and they do, sometimes they win, people do prefer people who have got a history in a neighborhood, in a community. And they do. I mean, it was a big boon to me that I had lived there all those years, that my son went to school there all those years. It was a big, big part of why people...
Again, it's an identity thing. People think,
Exactly.
well, they understand me because they've been living here.
And, you know, they've seen me in the grocery market, they've seen me at the cleaners, they've seen me at the, you know, the local coffee shop, you know, all of which we utilize in our neighborhoods. So you become a part of the community. And the second thing I would say is get involved in local struggles first. So we were in a struggle for a library branch in our neighborhood. We were in a struggle for a public swimming pool in our neighborhood. We stopped a freeway. We stopped the 2 freeway from knocking down all these houses that were the last affordable houses in Los Angeles at the time. And so, you know, so again, we saved Elysian Park from further intrusion after the Dodgers and the police department took a good part of it away. But we stopped that. Not a single foot's been lost since that Save Elysian Park group got started. So people had seen me around. So I tell people, anybody who wants to run for office from any community, establish yourself as a person who is defending the rights of others. Establish yourself as a person who is honest, who is not just the talker at the meeting, raising their hand all the time, but when it came time to volunteer, who's going to go down to City Hall and bring the petitions, who's going to help start the child care center we need in Echo Park, who's going to get the Echo Park pool built. You volunteer, people notice that. Now, not everybody notices that because only a fraction of the people are even involved in any of those things. But those people are people who care about their community, and they do talk to their neighbors and their family and their friends. And that's your best stuff. No matter what you put in the mail and no matter how many precincts you want, the best stuff are the people who've seen you do things to make the community better and who will tell their friends about it. In my first race for city council, I think we had, no, for school board, I think we had 65 coffees. You know?
Yep.
And people said, how did you even know 65 people to have coffees? Because a lot of people don't, even though they've lived there a while, because they've never been involved with any of the organizations. And I found that when people saw that I was active, saw that I kept coming back, that I volunteered to do my share of the work, not just the talking, that when I decided to run, I immediately had a bunch of people who said, yes, I want to help. Some were gay, most of them were not.
Right.
A lot of them were Latino, some were white, some were Asian. A lot of Filipinos. Why? Because on the school board I had been champion of the notion that we had to tell the difference between the Mexicans and the Filipinos when we were doing bilingual education, because they were all getting put into Spanish-English bilingual classes and they were speaking Tagalog.
Right.
So what I'm saying is if you do things, people do remember that.
Well, it's a coalition issue,
Yes,
too.
it is.
And
in this city,
hardly anyone's done it better than you, Jackie
well,
Goldberg.
thank you. It's
Anyway,
all a
we're
coalition.
out of time.
Oh, good.
But
Oh,
we always could
sad.
talk for a whole
I
other
know,
hour.
I know.
It's really, I do this for myself
Oh,
because it's
thank
kind of like,
you.
oh, I can talk to Jackie for an hour. Thank you so much
It's
for
always a
being with
pleasure.
us. And thank you for being with us. Gay and lesbian, transgender, bisexual people at the table, elected to office, need to have more and more and more coming along with term limits so that we can get used to it.